Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Velody, and we have a guest with us that is well known in the arena of working with people with Down syndrome and mental illness. It's fantastic to have with us today Dennis McGuire on the podcast. Dennis, I'll have you introduce yourself here in a second, but you guys may recognize his name from Mental Wellness in Adults with Down Syndrome, which is now in its second edition. You can find it at your booksellers and get way more information than what we're going to be talking about even today on the podcast. But Dennis, before I get too far into this, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you love working with this population?
Yeah, I'm actually a social worker. I got a degree 45 years ago. Gee, I was just looking at that. And for 15 years, I just worked in the field training therapists. And where about 1990, I was recruited to start some kind of a program for people with Down syndrome with the local parent group, National Association for Down Syndrome. And I met Sheila Hebine, who's a very intense human being, very strong, very good mentor. And she introduced me to Brian Chicoine. And 1992, we began a clinic at a big hospital, Lutheran General. And frankly, Brian knew a little, but it was impressive what little I knew. I mean, it was scary. But the good thing is, the really good thing about that is that it allowed me to kind of get to the real experts, the families who had to be the experts, and the people with Down syndrome. So it was, we started talking to people, they'd tell us something, and we'd write it down. I'd go back and begin to ask other people. So over much time, many years, we gathered together really family wisdom. And that's what the book is, that's what this is.
That's so great. And as you know, I have my roots back in Chicago as well. My family is still there. My brother, who is my inspiration, is still there in Chicago as well. They recall meeting Sheila Hebine many years ago as well, even to this day. So I think that's a name that a lot of folks in that region would definitely remember. And what you and Brian Chicoine did together in starting that clinic, it's legendary. The idea of having such a large clinics there to serve people with Down syndrome. So great to have you on the podcast today. One of the things I think I've shared with you in the past when we've been meeting face to face, I've shared with you about how my brother, one of the things that I love about him is his self-talk. I learned so much from him just by sitting outside the door and listening. And we have families that'll call us sometimes and they'll say, my child is talking to themselves. Is this schizophrenia? Do I need to be worried about multiple personalities? So tell us a little bit about self-talk. What is it? What's its purpose?
When we first started, there were a whole bunch of people that came in on major medications. It was pretty appalling to us. But the more I looked at self-talk, the more I kind of found that it's a huge, it's revered in the child development field, because it's one of the major ways kids learn a new developmental task. And simply the families talk them through the task that's just slightly out of their reach. And then the child takes that and walks themselves through it. And so the self-talk gives them the boost that allows them to do that. And we found out that most of that self-talk is internalized by about the age of about 9 or something. But in other children with challenges like learning disabilities or something, they tended to hold on to that self-talk much, much later even into high school. And so people with Down syndrome need it even more. And so it turns out when you look at the research, we all do it. All of us, we just have enough, we kind of protecting ourselves. So we do it under our breath. And so we all do it, just people with Down syndrome do it, and they just don't know that it can get them in trouble. Just a little example, one of the families I worked with, the son was talking to his mom, and he's not on safe ground. She verbally, he's not feeling comfortable. So she says, you know, you did something wrong with your brother. And he was feeling really, his feelings were hurt, but he had to go to the, like 15 feet away to the bathroom, close the door, and she heard this, you horrible B&B, and second, and so she yells, who are you talking to in there? What are you saying about me? And he was incensed because that was his private space, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, my brother, when he comes to visit us here in Pittsburgh, will take a few days to kind of adjust to the whole idea of being. I have a big family. I got 4 kids, and he'll go into his room and he'll say, you know, those kids, they're taking all of his time from me. Where's our brother time? And then the other voice in his head will then respond and say, oh, come on, they're your niece and nephew. You love them too. Yeah. Oh yeah, I do love them. And it helps him to kind of calm and adjust to the situation. So by all means, we let him have that time. And so I like their perspective. It's that internal discussions that we always have, just externalized in folks with Down syndrome.
Right. And the thing is that a lot of folks can't articulate what's going on to other people, you know, and so like you, a lot of the families sit outside the door, and it's hugely beneficial. You get a sense of what's going on. And some of those things are really positive, but sometimes people can hear things like, you're stupid, or I don't like what you're doing. And basically they're bringing what they encounter outside, and it becomes a lab that they try it out. And so families can actually hear stuff that's going on in people's lives.
Yeah. So it's normal. Doesn't need medication, doesn't need a diagnosis, is what you would say.
No.
I would agree.
It can be an indication of some things, but it's basically very normal.
Yeah, perfect. One other thing that, just kind of switching topics, that we see a lot is a lot of concrete thinking in people with Down syndrome. And I know this is an area that you've spoken on before as well, that I've heard. Tell us what it is. What is concrete thinking? How does that happen in folks with Down syndrome? How is it something that helps them?
Yeah, I mean, there's concrete or abstract. And abstract thinking allows you to see the relationship between things. Concrete gives you one thing, you know, kind of the one issue or concrete. And so it's really helpful in some ways, because you don't have this abstract notion of keeping up with the Joneses. And so our guys, there's huge benefits to having concrete thinking. They live in the here and now, and they move slower, they take in the world. Where they get in trouble is sometimes because they kind of see things concretely, they can't always adapt to a change. For example, there was a lot of social kind of skills, safety training in groups, and we told people that can be a problem, because what happens, they learn how to talk to each other and protect themselves in that group, but it wouldn't move to the community, because that's a whole separate world, a separate place. So we told the people running those programs that they had to move it into the community, and it's been helpful. We've had folks get fired because they're very good at their jobs, they're conscientious, they're reliable, but they get in trouble around taking things concretely, like the boss says, call me anytime. And they do, 3 a.m. Wait a second, or, come and see me anytime. And, so it's, and some of those things too, it's like, it's just kind of helping them kind of learn to finesse things. And we use some of the other behavioral characteristics like visual learning and groove things to help them adapt to these kind of things. So they can, even though they have a little too concrete, we found there's ways to help them kind of adapt to new situation. People would be in a job at a grocery store and they'd move sites. And it's almost like, okay, this is a whole set of rules. So you had to kind of go and say, okay, well, it's the same rules. Let's just walk through it. And so you do role plays with them and amazingly, role play allows them to visually see and take it in, and they learn. So it's a very powerful way to learn.
So you've been talking, Dennis, about the visual memory, and anyone who's been around someone with Down syndrome has probably encountered the fact that they are able to learn concepts better visually than perhaps auditorily. And so give me an idea, when you're talking about visual memory skills as maybe a strength actually for people with Down syndrome, what are some things that you would come to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, if they're learning how to do a task that's new,
yeah,
and they see it, then they can follow it through reliably. If you tell somebody something, they may forget it easily, but if you show them, we found they never forget.
Yeah.
You can use calendars as a way to kind of help them plan and predict what their life looks like. And that's one way to get around the concrete stuff that gets them kind of, and so they love calendars, and they tend to run 3 or 4 at a time because they're helpful ways of organizing the world. The visual memory, though, was pretty striking to us, that we began to hear families tell us that there's like a photographic memory. So if people see something, they tend to hold it in memory. If you tell them, they'll forget it, but if they see it, it's phenomenal. And so we used to ask questions if you were to go in your son or daughter's room and move something an inch or 2, what would happen? Invariably, they'd tell us they would go in and move it right back. Say, oh my God, I don't remember what the hell I had for lunch, let alone, so I was shocked. And then they tend to not lose their way around schools that are huge or shopping centers because they visually, once they're there once, they hold it. The problem with the visual memory was that they can replay events from the past as if it's happening all over again with all the original feelings and emotions. And that can be really good, but it can also create some real problems. They're much more susceptible to phobias. So they have a run-in with an animal, or a lot of folks have weather storm things. So early on in their life, they kind of get terrified by storms. And every time it gets dark outside, they can kind of replay that. So we got huge numbers of people that are better weather predictors than any weatherman,
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we kind of begin to figure out if people are having challenges or issues because of that. We got called to a school once, and this young man was in middle school. And for the first time, he had to go to a different class. So the bells would ring, and then they go out into the hallway. Have you ever been in a change of class? It's terrifying.
Yes.
I mean, they're loud and they're taller than, and so this young man was just traumatized by it. And so every time the bell rang, he just shut down. So we said, it just triggers this memory of being kind of terrified. So we just asked the school to let him go slightly before or slightly after the bell. And it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. And these visual memory skills and situational, emotional memories, they just seem to be something that can be a real strength. But as you highlight, it can sometimes be a challenge if they hang on to those memories too much. And it kind of leads into my next question. This is something that I think you probably have created the name for, called the groove. And I don't know if anyone before you probably used that terminology, but this idea of desire for sameness is something that we hear from a young age, even through adulthood, in people with Down syndrome. And I know you've called it the groove. So tell us, what is the groove? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, let me ask you, Kishore, do you encounter the groove with your buddy at home in Chicago?
Oh my gosh, with my brother all the time, the groove. Even when he comes here from Chicago to Pittsburgh, that requires going from Central Time Zone to Eastern Time Zone, which means all the TV shows are off by an hour. And so everything gets adjusted because of the time change that's happened. And so, yeah, the groove is a big part of our life.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that's strength and a curse and a gift, you know, in the
Mhm.
sense that, and so it really allows people to organize and manage their lives, their personal items. They're very, you know, dignified. A lot of times when they're in public, they're a sociological minority. I mean, they look different. So how they present themselves can be very helpful. And our guys tend to be pretty elegant, pretty careful, and also how they manage stuff in their rooms. But the groove can like self-talk, can be a way to express huge stress. And so when people would come in and they say, here's a young man who had a job, he had a girlfriend, he loved going out dances and parties, and now he's sitting at home rearranging his desk so that everything was just perfect.
Mm.
And so we said, well, we have to kind of do some digging and find out what's going on. Turns out he was dumped by his girlfriend. He had a thyroid problem that we had not seen before. And the job, there was somebody bothering him at the job. So it was overwhelming stress. And so his kind of fixing things was a way to manage that stress. He didn't really know why he was rearranging things, but it was kind of a fail-safe system to kind of protect him. And so we just would look at that as some message about something. And sometimes even the groove would be a kind of point to what the issue is and stuff. Does that feel right to you too?
Yeah. So that can be a sign of an issue going on, but it can also this desire for routine. Is that kind of what you, when you would talk about the groove, is that like the big picture is like this desire for, okay, every day at this time I do this thing? Is
right.
Is there a thought process as to why that might be? Like, what is it about the world or the pace of the world, things that make people with Down syndrome necessarily prefer to live in that kind of groove or routine?
You know, I don't, you know, I know when other people get stressed, they kind of over control.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably an onboard system that just helps people. It gives them some kind of sense of order and structure.
Yeah.
And under stress, they just increase that.
Mm-hmm.
And so overall, the groove is incredibly helpful to them. It's just when there's too much stress, it's a kind of a system that allows them to kind of express that in the same way that like people would have like in the general population would have headaches or backaches or as a preferred way to express stress. Well, the groove would be a way to kind of communicate stress.
Yeah.
So we would start digging when that would happen, see what's going on.
Yeah. Wow, this has been really helpful. Dennis, I know that we just skimmed the surface on a lot of these topics. Is there anything before we kind of close this podcast, anything more that you would want to make sure that you share? Or are you feeling like we touched on these pretty well and we can give a link to the book in the podcast show notes?
No, the one thing I forgot to answer was why I love working with people.
Yeah, that's a great conclusion.
What I found is that they were my teachers,
Mm-hmm.
that they looked at life and they taught me what's important in life, that people are important, that rushing around like a crazy person, which I do, you know. And so I'm convinced that that I learned so much by just slowing down and seeing things around me. And the families I worked with have always reported, you know, I know it's been challenged sometimes, but the gifts are huge.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that's true for you, you know,
the
gifts are enormous.
Yeah.
And so, and also I think I approach things, I have attention deficit. So I always think everybody's got a glitch or two or three or four. It's just how you adapt to it, how you then bring out your gifts too. So that they've really allowed me to kind of see what kind of gifts they have, and they're enormous. They're very sensitive. They're one area where they can get in trouble is they're socially too attuned to people. And so if there's conflict or tension out there, they can read it too easily. I don't know if that makes sense, but so you kind of have to kind of watch and make sure they're not overwhelmed attention because they read social energy really well.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, that's so great. And it just came to me. I remember you one of the things that you wrote many years ago now, it was something along the lines of, what if everyone in the world had Down syndrome? What would the world look like? And I think after going through these last few years of so much turmoil within the world and ongoing now with everything that's going on, I think the world would look a whole lot different if
Yeah.
people with Down syndrome rule the world. And so I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Dennis, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I love working with you too.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes. You. Oh, of course. And for our listeners, I hope you found this as eye-opening really as I have, in terms of learning more about how psychologically things work and mentally how things work in people with Down syndrome. There is a wonderful resource that I will put the link to called Mental Wellness in Adults with Down Syndrome. It's the second edition that's out now. I'll put a link to that in our show notes. And we've really enjoyed having you on this podcast today, Dennis. For our listeners, if you have anything else that you would like us to cover, any other topics that you would like us to cover, please do send us a message at Down Syndrome Center at chp.edu, and we will be glad to address that, find speakers that can address that as well. But until next time, bye-bye.